Live from SABC headquarters in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this week's penultimate edition of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight,
we are moving forward. We are going to challenge that judge. One of the things we're going to do is to consider to approach Labour Court appeals. In fact, directly appeal to Labour Court appeals.
Numsa's leadership defiant despite a court ruling that has nullified its conference. Where to from here for the union's embattled leadership? More than 2 months after the deadline that was set by President Cyril Ramaphosa expired, government, business, Labour and civil society are still far apart. Tonight we hear Labour and civil society's side of the story.
The ANC is not a bank robber. The ANC relies on donations. If the ANC was running a cash in transit heist, something like that, then it would say, no, we know the robberies we're going to be conducting in the next 2 months will give us enough.
The governing party's policy conference will go ahead tomorrow, even as unpaid workers line up at the venue protesting after working for months without their salaries. Those are the issues we're looking at in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. The Labour Court in Johannesburg has dismissed the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, Numsa's application for leave to appeal its interdict against convening a national congress in Cape Town. Last week, the court granted the union's aggrieved leaders and members an urgent application to stop the election of new national leadership. However, Numsa defied the court order, claiming that it has satisfied all the requirements of the court concerning its central committee's infringement of the union's constitution. Meanwhile, a group of Numsa members has been barred from entering the International Convention Center, which is the venue of the Congress. Dozens of Numsa members have been demonstrating just outside the entrance to the venue where the Congress is currently underway. The group has been denied entry. Numsa's Western Cape Secretary, Vuyo Lufele, says the Congress is illegal. Yesterday, the Western Cape region walked out of the Congress after the province's leadership claimed that it did not comply with Numsa's constitution because the Mpumalanga region was excluded from attending. Well, Patrick Dill is a Labour lawyer and mediator. He joins us on the line. Patrick, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. The question that everyone has been asking tonight as Numsa officials and those, of course, they have invited, sip some wine and enjoy their dinner, is whether that Congress is in fact legal, given the court's ruling last night.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to the viewers. In short, I think it's not valid, or whether the decisions that they'll be making won't be valid. The court has, made a clear decision in the interdict that the Congress should be interdicted, and that until such time as the court lifts the interdict, anything that happens during the gathering in Cape Town, insofar as performing whatever duties they will wish to do or may want to do in terms of the Constitution, will be invalid and not binding. And that will be also related to the election of officials. So a party can't, of its own volition, say, look, we think we've satisfied all the reasons for the interdict, and we're going to go ahead. It's only the court that can lift the interdict, because until it does so, the whole proceeding is under the judicial management or the judicial review of the court.
According to reports, close to 40 million rands has been spent. The Enrichera seems to be saying that because they intend to appeal, they're justified in just going ahead and doing what they are currently doing. Is he correct legally?
No, the interdict stands until it's overturned. It could, if it's overturned on appeal, well, then that lifts it. But until such time as that is decided, it stands. And so it doesn't have the effect of suspending the interdict at all, because that would undermine the whole very purpose of what an interdict is for. It's an urgent court process designed to prevent something from happening. And if you merely can escape what is about to happen and the reason it's being interdicted simply by lodging an appeal, that would nullify the whole purpose of having an interdict and the force that has it. And so one of the main issues that you have to show in an interdict, and an urgent interdict, as this one was, that unless it's granted, in other words, to hold the Congress, to suspend the Congress going forward, the people who brought the interdict, in other words, those are members who've been excluded from it and wouldn't be able to participate, they would suffer irreparable harm. And so that's the reason why it came in the first place. And so it does not suspend the operation of the interdict by merely lodging an appeal.
And the law is the law. It shouldn't matter whether the same guy, I mean, they had appealed to is the same guy who ruled against them in the first place. Because that's another point that Andrew Chirwa seemed to be making, that it's the same guy who, ruled against us previously. So we weren't expecting anything better.
There's nothing irregular about that at all, Vuyo. The very first step in any appeal against any court decision, you've got to go to the judge or the judges who made that decision and say, listen, we want to appeal against your judgment. What do you say about it? In other words, are you prepared to change your mind about it or not? So you have to go to that judge who made the decision for leave to appeal. In other words, permission to go on appeal. That's the first step. And if that doesn't work, as apparently they're now saying, then I want to skip that and go straight to the Labour Appeal Court. So it is an absolutely regular process. The same judge hears the process again. And let me say, Vuyo, that granting of leave to appeal is a check and balance, in the sense that there's a very high threshold that the applicants, in this case Numsa, has to show to say that the appeal has reasonable grounds of success. And if the sitting judge who made this says, I don't think you've got reasonable grounds of success, I'm not going to grant it, well, that's completely regular.
Say they are denied again. What other options will they have if they continue? Well, if they want to take the matter up?
Well, I mean, they could carry on with the appeal, but in any event, first of all, the prospects of success on the appeal, given the facts of this particular case, the merits of why the interdict was granted in the first place, and the reasons that the judge gave for granting it were pretty strong. I mean, this judge was pretty clear and pretty adamant that there was a clear and urgent and emerging damage that was going to be caused to people if they did not grant the interdict. And last night, when this appeal was lodged and it was heard on this sort of format in the court, the judge said that he was absolutely surprised that the Congress had gone ahead without obeying the interdict. And so, in a sense, that is contempt of the interdict. And any party who comes to a court wanting relief must come with clean hands. They mustn't come saying, we want to appeal against your interdict, your ruling. But in any event, we've taken matters into our own hands and we've proceeded anyway. Please grant us right to appeal anyway. I mean, the force of that legal argument is not sustainable.
Well, they're adamant that the judge misread the Numsa's constitution?
Well, I mean, another court can have a look at what the Constitution says, and it seems to me that the issue seems to be about, interpretation about what is a suspension and what is a precautionary suspension, which is a very narrow kind of thing to try and hang a legal argument on. Effectively, they're pretty much the same thing. And so I think that the prospects of success on appeal in this case are pretty low, let me say, if there are any prospects at all, particularly because of what I just said, what the judge in the making the ruling on the interdict has already said about it and expressed himself on it. And it seems pretty clearly, logically, legally, that it looks on solid ground that the grounds for interdict were granted. But the other thing too, Vuya, is that in any event, if you want to appeal against an interdict or get some kind of relief, there must be something that comes out of it. The horse has already bolted on this. The Congress has happened anyway. And so whatever, even if it were to go to appeal, and even if it were to be decided in their favor, it's academic anyway. The damage, so-called damage, that the interdict was supposed to prevent has happened. And so the interdict will prevail, but the damage will be averted because it comes under the protection of the interdict, and therefore the elections and everything that's going on will not be valid.
Well, we'll see how this one pans out. Let me thank you very much for your time, Patrick, this evening.
My pleasure, Wade. Good night.
Well, as many analysts, commentators, and those who have insights into its inner workings have been saying, Numsa's problems didn't start with last week's court interdict. Few people understand present-day Numsa better than its retired Deputy General Secretary, and that's Cloete, who joins us on the line. Carl, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Please unmute.
Good evening, Vuyo, and to can you hear me, Vuyo?
Yes, we can hear you now. Please go ahead. Well,
good evening to you.
Yes. I don't know what you make of what we're seeing and hearing.
Well, you had a very important conversation with the former Numsa General Secretary last night, Salumko Nondwangu, and he made three very important points. The first point he made was to suggest that in the 35-year history of Numsa, this is unprecedented. Never, ever in the history of Numsa would you have seen 53 shop stewards, office bearers, elected officials suspended on the eve of a very important once every 4 years. The second point he made is that intolerance has defined what is happening, in that he makes the point that in the past, Numsa tolerated frank, robust, and open discussion, including dissent of different and divergent views. And this time around, it appears that intolerance has set in. I think the third point he makes is that you do not exist in a vacuum as a national leader. Any organization, any trade union, any civil society formation works on the basis of a bottom-up democratic process. And I guess what we're seeing is something that
Okay, we're going to take a quick ad break and try and re-establish that line to Carl Cloete, the retired General Secretary of Numsa, keen to really hear that history, but also to establish what really went wrong over the years, as many pundits, but also people who have inside track have been saying long before, in fact, last week's interdict and last night's judgment. Well, if you've just joined us, we were having a conversation with a retired Numsa Deputy Secretary, and that's Carl Cloete, on the back, of course, of the events that have happened over the past few days. The latest being a ruling by the High Court that the Congress that is currently underway in Cape Town, where Numsa elected its new office bearers last night, is in fact invalid. We did have a lawyer, Patrick Dale, earlier, who was saying that that doesn't bode well for Numsa, and for all intents and purposes, the gathering in Cape Town is or remains illegal. We're going to see how that pans out. But we're having this conversation with Carl about what actually went wrong. There's no one better than him to understand what is going on at Numsa, inside Numsa, as we speak. Carl, you were, and we now have much less time than we had, or we were going to have. Of course, that line gave us problems. But what I think South Africans would like to understand is what actually happened. How did Numsa degenerate, as you were suggesting?
I'm suggesting, Vuyo, that in its 35 years of existence, we have never seen what we're seeing today in 2022. I think that intolerance, sectarianism, and undemocratic behavior is responsible for what happened. I listened to an interview by the Numsa president addressing journalists when he explained that they will take the matter to court. Some of the things or utterances is to the extent that there's an enemy within, there are snakes that we need to get rid of. Now, you can never, in a democratic organization where there should be plural views, different views, and tolerance for opposing perspectives. You can never speak like that, Vuyo. And I think partly because of that, this is why we find ourselves in this situation.
Is that the reason you left before time?
Well, Vuyo, mine was in the making. I requested to be released in 2019. The Central Committee of Numsa told me you were elected with your term ending December 2020 and persuaded me to remain, and I agreed. Of course, COVID came in because December 2020 was the date that we were going to be outgoing national office bearers for a new leadership to be elected. But also, far more important for me as a person, I joined Numsa on the 7th of August, 1987, and I know no other workplace other than Numsa until I felt that it's important for me to do something different. Of course, this is not the platform for me to get into what is troubling Numsa, but I think we have a situation where Numsa is on the brink of disaster.
Well, I just want to read you something from an open letter to Ivan that you once wrote, where you're saying that on October 5, 2020, in a National Office Bearers meeting, I promised all Numsa NOBs, National Office Bearers that is, that if I came under attack by anyone in Numsa, I would not hesitate to defend myself. Now, that doesn't sound like someone who left peacefully or without problems.
Well, I wanted to make the point very clear, Vuyo, that the leadership of Numsa should respect my decision to resign and to go into early retirement. But I'm well aware of the fact, Vuyo, and I can declare this, that a person like Ivan Jim had never wanted me since 2008 to deputize him, and I also did not want to deputize him because we have a long history from the South African Communist Party when we could never see eye to eye. Him in the Eastern Cape, I, SABC provincial chairperson in the Western Cape, but I got persuaded by comrades to accept the position. In fact, if truth be told, my removal as the Numsa Western Cape Regional Secretary in 2008 was his doing. In 2016, of course, I later learned that he had gone around and basically wanted to know from Vuyo Lufele in the Western Cape, why is it that you supporting this Malawi, this colored? Now, I never thought that somebody who professes to be a communist could speak in those terms. But when I responded in that open letter was when Irvin Jim attacked my person in the Hlanganani Regional Congress. And I hope you pardon my language, but this is what he used, that I am a muffin. Now, that kind of language for me constituted gender-based violence, discrimination against people with a different sexual orientation. And Numsa has a gender committee, and in that meeting were activists of the Numsa Gender Committee. And I felt that, and the president of Numsa was there, the president of SAFTU was there, did not call him to order, and I felt that I will not tolerate, not Irvin Jim, Andrew Chirwa, Matt Chavalau, irrespective of what your name is, I have credibility, I have integrity, and I will not allow any person to besmirch my name that I have built up as an activist from the United Democratic Front, the African National Congress. Then I'm no longer there, the South African Communist Party, KUSATU, and SAFTU. So I'm not here to lament. I'm simply answering your question because I think that to lie and not tell the truth is not helpful to anyone. Of course, I know that after this interview, there would be severe criticism of how dare he. Well, that's the problem in Numsa today, that there's no tolerance for different views and the expression of what you think is to be said and how you want to say it. It is not permissible at this time in Numsa.
To those who say, well, that was until Carl didn't see eye to eye with Ivan Jim, but for a while you were birds of the same feather, you agreed on everything, and in fact you even participated in what some people called the purging of comrades who didn't agree with you. What do you say to that?
Let me be very clear, Vuyo. Almost called you Comrade Vuyo. I am a Democrat, and when a decision gets taken, I will defend that decision even if I was against it. Few people would know this. Numsa, when Sulumko Nondwangu was the General Secretary, we had occasion prior to Polokwane to discuss Numsa's position on the leadership in the ANC. And I can tell you today that the three of us coming from different angles had three completely different mandates. Well, at least I had a mandate. The mandate of the Western Cape was to support Kgalema Motlanthe. Comrade Slumko was in support for Thabo Mbeki to continue. Irvin Jim presented Zuma as the Messiah. Eventually, the National Executive Committee took a decision that we should support Jacob Zuma and take that position to Kusatu. I want anyone to tell me whether I had on any occasion contradicted the Numsa position. In fact, in press conferences, I articulated as if it was my own, and I defended Numsa's decision. You hear this for the first time from me, so it is not something that has happened recently that we had fallen out. In fact, we hold very different ideological perspectives.
Carl, very quickly, in 20 seconds, we've taken a lot of time. Of course, we were messed up by that line. What will it take to take Numsa back to its glory days? 20 seconds.
Well, it would have to respect its constitution. It would have to respect its lower structure. It would have to respect democracy that's worker-controlled in essence. And it would have to show that the leadership cannot be unaccountable. It works on a mandate and it must account. And for me, and this is what I want to leave you with, when you have sung and your song is done, leave the stage when you still can.
I guess that applies to, or you're talking to, Ivan Jim there. Let me thank you for your time and insights this evening. I would, if only that line didn't really prevent us from taking more time excuse me, on this conversation. To this now, 100 days, that's the time period President Cyril Ramaphosa gave his government, business, labor, and civil society negotiators to arrive at a consensus on how to take the country forward by crafting agreements on how to kickstart the economy and create jobs. Now, more than 2 months after that deadline, there's still no agreement in place. Here's Business Unity President Bonang Mohale here on the program just the other day.
We like overcomplicating things because we like the sound of our own voices, rather than simplifying it, which is the work of leadership. There are really two both systemic and systematic challenges that are confronting this country. Some would say existential crisis. Number one is youth unemployment. At 74.9%, it's a powder keg that is just waiting to explode. Number two is Eskom. And in particular, we should be talking about stable, predictable, and reliable energy supply. Those are the two ones. But like typical politicians, we'll talk about the triple challenges. There's only one challenge. The challenge is stubbornly high levels of unemployment, period. Because this then leads to increasing levels of inequality and increasing levels of poverty. All of them can be addressed with one thing and one thing only: when you have the singularity of purpose and laser focus on what needs to be done.
Well, for Labour and civil society constituencies reflections, I'm joined in studio by the convener of the community constituency at Nedlac, Thulani Chefuta. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Vuyo and viewers.
And on the line, we have one of the Labour constituency's negotiators, and that's COSATU's Matthew Parks. Good evening, Matthew.
Good evening, Vuyo. Good evening, Thulani.
Thank you, gentlemen, both of you, for agreeing to participate on this program tonight. Thulani, from where you sit, what's the cause of the delay?
Well, the process for the social compact was off to a very slow take right from the beginning. From the time the president made the announcement to the first round of engagements, that on its own took its own time. Secondly, unlike many other processes that have been deliberated upon in the higher structures of Nedlac, this one specifically started off with bilaterals that were taking place between all social partners with government, which to some extent we agreed with, because there are issues that from civil society we wanted to pick up with government and government only. Of course, we guess that there are issues from labor and business that they also wanted to pick up with government. And those issues are critical in terms of pulling us back when we meet as a collective. Hence, we agreed that the bilaterals should unblock all those issues that affect two constituencies, and by the time we meet, we should be dealing with issues that concern all of us. We must make this point, Vuyo, that our process of social dialogue has not been smooth sailing. There is a tendency of using social dialogue from each one of us to bargain for our own narrow sectarian issues. And in this process, we have taken a conscious decision as civil society that this is the process that we must use to rise above those, agree on the challenges that confront us, and define a national agenda to which this social compact will be the response to.
We're going to get to the latter part of your answer. I want to go to the first part where you said the bilaterals. Was it only the bilaterals that caused the delay, or was it the bilaterals everyone wanted, but also other things? Just clarity on that.
Well, our view is the bilaterals took a lot of time. And the reason bilaterals took a lot of time is that there were emerging and significant issues of difference between these different constituencies and government. But the third element to it is that I know of instances where, from amongst ourselves as other constituencies, we would ask for extended periods of consultation, preparation for those engagements, and those also added to that.
Matthew Parks, from your vantage point, what are the causes for the delay or for not meeting the 100-day deadline that the president set for this process?
Well, I think, to be honest, government is best placed to explain that one. We have had some bilaterals. We've been a bit frustrated as Labour about the speed that government has worked on to engage with us. We've had a few bilaterals. We're only going to start the formal kind of a Nedlac engagements, I think, on the 11th of August. But look, I mean, as COSATU we're keen, and as organised labour we're keen to have a social compact. Trade unions put a lot of value in social compacts because they believe that there's only so much individual parties can do. But the problems facing South Africa, facing workers in society, are so huge. It really does require government and business, labour and communities to work together to all contribute something to resolve what affects all of us. But having said that, we've also raised with government quite sharply that a social compact has to be based upon progressive principles. It cannot be based upon pickpocketing workers, throwing workers under the bus. It has to be about protecting workers. It has to be about giving meaningful relief and solidarity to the poor and to the unemployed, about rebuilding a capacitated state to help develop society and the economy. We think everybody has to make a contribution and a compromise at times. We appreciate government on its own country. We think the business too also has to come to the party and put money on the table. We've said what we as Labour can put on the table, what we can contribute, what we can help can build the economy. But we've also said that we don't need to focus on many issues, not a long shopping list. We know what our problems are. It's about rebuilding Eskom so we all have reliable electricity to grow the economy. It's about rebuilding Transnet so that mining, agriculture, manufacturing can grow. Jobs can be created there. It's about rebuilding metro rail so workers in the cities can get to work on time, so those economies in the cities can be productive. It's also about tackling corruption in the state, about rebuilding local government, about giving support to the unemployed, about helping to reduce unemployment. So for us, those are the fundamental issues. We don't have to resolve everything at once. We've been telling government, let's focus on the big issues, which will make a meaningful difference to people. That'll give us political space and credibility. We can address other issues as we go along. But for us right now, let's focus on the key issues, as Bonang was saying earlier: unemployment, electricity, transit, metro rail, growing the economy. Let's not be distracted by a long shopping list of issues which will take us very long. But we've agreed with government. Let's give space for the next few months for engagements. Let's have a meaningful, not a rush process, but a meaningful, substantive process so that the president can then announce it and it can then enjoy credibility among society. But we've also stressed to government we don't have the luxury of too much time. We have elections in 2 years' time. Society is exasperated. Society is tired. They want to see progress. They want to see government. They want to see everybody moving along and their lives becoming better.
I think you've answered very well what was going to be my next question. But just for a bit of clarity on the first part of your answer, you are, talking about, how government has handled, this process. You seem to be putting the blame on it. But Thulani earlier spoke about the contribution that the other partners, in other words, I'm assuming he was referring to civil society, labor and business, where the other constituencies have asked for deadlines precisely because they wanted these bilaterals, but I assume there were other things as well. Which is which, for you? Is it the speed with which the government has actually handled this process only, or do you also agree that you, or among yourselves, there are other, constituencies to be blamed for the delay as well? Just briefly on that one.
Yeah, look, we are frustrated with government, not just in the social compact, but generally, that government moves very slowly on most issues. So they take a long time. And I think in this case, that has been an issue. Perhaps with the hindsight, the president made a mistake in the SONA to give a 100-day time frame, and government just didn't move with the necessary speed. But look, we don't want to crucify government for it. We support the idea of a social compact. But again, we also actually told government a few weeks ago, about a month ago rather, that when they wanted to get things done very quickly within a few weeks, they said, look, we've lost the last few months. Let's give adequate time now to engage so that they have substantive agreements and agreements that can enjoy the support not only of government, but also business, community and labor, that all parties can feel they buy into, that parties don't feel they're being thrown under the bus. And if we do rush it at times, it can create unintended consequences. So I think for us, it's about now looking at the way forward, how to get things moving. And again, to look at the key issues which are really going to make a huge difference, and a difference in quite a short space of time.
Thulani, is this process at the hands, or entirely at the hands of the government? Are you, as the other three partners, kind of feeling, are you not at the driver's seat, so to speak? Are you not co-drivers, all four of you in this?
We can definitely confirm that there is a leadership role that is played by government, even in the coordination of engagements with other constituencies. But what we have done on our side as civil society is that at the point when government sets the program of engagement, and in between that, we find ourselves to be having pressing issues that we are ready to engage with, we have been able to knock on government's door and say we need this engagement so that we can unblock one or two things that constitute part of the issues that we have raised in the agenda of the social compact itself. And so we can definitely confirm that government has been at the driving seat of this.
Okay.
When the process started, the bilaterals were in such a way that government will convene the first meeting and the constituency is requested to put into the table what it thinks the social compact should be and it should do, and what should be its results. Okay. And out of those, the engagements would ensue.
Matthew has just detailed what this process means, for them, and what they believe it should or it shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. What, for you as a community constituency, are the key issues, and what are the things, or what is it that you want to protect?
We think this process should be used to agree on the most pressing of challenges that we're confronted with. And we're not running short of the scope of those challenges. There are cross-cutting challenges that, if you look into the NDP diagnostic report, if you look into the research reports that are released by Stats SA, we would all agree that the challenge of unemployment is very high and unacceptable. The educational outcomes that we produce are way too low for the investments that we make on education. The economy, all economic indicators are having their head looking down. And so for us, we think that the process should then be used to redefine the national priorities that supersede our narrow sectarian interest into a national agenda that responds to the collective challenges of South Africa. And we believe that in that equation, we must spend an effort in undertaking activities that attract and increase investments in productive sectors of the economy, in which case we will grow the economy with the people. All we stand for is that the economy must be for the benefit of the people. The growth of the economy must not just be an indicator that many of us can watch on the TV and clap hands that the economy is growing. It must find expression on the daily lives of the people. And in that, we believe that employment should be one of those benefits, but other relief measures should be included in that. And we're of the view that social relief measures to address immediate pressures of poverty is not mutually exclusive with growth and employment for people to find meaningful economic activity.
Quickly on that last note, I'm keen to know what your position is, or whether you perhaps think what is going on now, the delays around the 350 rands grant, for example, and of course the broader conversation about a basic income grant. Where you stand on that, because I think they speak to that very last issue that you just raised.
We are the ones who proposed the grant in the processes of the COVID response in the country. Although we proposed it at a higher level, but it came to pass. When all other social partners at Nedlac were agreeing that there is no money, we wrote to the president and had a direct engagement with the president. The first extension of that grant was as a result of our pressure. In all our interventions, we insist that universal basic income grant must be part of the solution. For anyone who does not read poverty in research reports, who goes around South Africa, will see the glaring poverty, which this 350 rand grant and the potential that the universal basic income grant may have should be part of the package of the solutions.
Quickly, the president, when he spoke about this social compact, Matthew, said also that by the time parties get into these conversations, you should also be prepared or ready, or be in a position to say, this is what, or these are the things that we prepared to forgo or sacrifice, in search of this solution that is going to take the nation forward. Very briefly, from Labour's point of view, what are those things?
Sure. Look, we put in our proposal to government in March already what we as Labour can contribute. And in fact, to be honest, we've been contributing even long before we had our social compact discussions. So there's workers who build this economy, there's nurses who run our hospitals, there's teachers who manage our schools, and so forth, often foregoing wage increases, especially over the past 2 years. We've seen many workers go without wage increases. If you look at any company in South Africa, and virtually every single listed company, even unlisted companies, it is workers' pension funds who invest in these companies, who actually give these companies the lifeline to exist, to hire people, to spend money, to buy products, to produce, etc. The PIC is workers' pension and insurance money. It's the biggest investment fund in the continent. We worked very closely with government and business and community over the last 2 years at Nedlac to release 64 billion rand from the Unemployment Insurance Fund to help 5.5 million workers in the private sector have money to take care of their families, also stimulate money to the economy. Now, the UF is not contributed to by the government, it's paid for by workers and employers. So in essence, it is workers' money that we have helped to channel into the economy. We actually initiated the Eskom Social Compact as COSATU in 2019. It was adopted in 2020. We offered assistance to government to reduce the Eskom debt, to enable Eskom to focus on maintenance and generation. We're still saying that offer still stands. We need to help Eskom get back on its feet because it is our most critical national economic asset.
Okay.
We've championed the Amendment of Regulation 28, which will allow pension funds to invest in infrastructure if they want to, if it makes economic sense and is attractive, which I think it will be in many instances, because we think that will help. When pension funds are worth about 8 trillion rand, that can help to generate huge amounts of money into infrastructure in the economy, which will help grow the economy. Governments will never have enough money for all of our infrastructure needs. So we've said here are rands and cents we're willing to offer to assist government, to assist the economy, also, of course, to benefit workers. But we need government also to assist us, to help govern, to do what it's elected to do. And of course, we also need to see the private sector, the banks, also contribute on their side to match what we've been putting on the table long before we even had a social compact discussion.
Quick last word from you, Tulan.
We believe that communities must take responsibility in some areas. Key amongst those is the fact that you should not ban a clinic to demand water. Secondly, communities must be more conscientized to pay for services that we receive. And in exchange for that, there must indeed be service delivery. In exchange for that, there must indeed be no corruption. The third area is that it is communities that must guard against practices like illegal connections of water and electricity, and such that those who do such must be criminally dealt with. But in instances where people can genuinely not afford, interventions like the indigent programs of municipalities must be alive, working and responsive to the needs of the people. There must be no instances where people can just steal cables and all of those and nothing happens in communities. We must be the first line of defense against the infrastructure that is working for us.
Let me thank both of you, Chilan Chefluto, Matthew Parks. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
To this now, all eyes will be on the ANC policy conference set to kick off tomorrow morning. It comes at a time when the party faces internal squabbles while the living conditions of ordinary people have worsened and the cost of living is increasing alarmingly. Many will be glued to the proceedings to see if the party will succeed in coming up with policies that will change South Africans' lives. Among the issues definitely set to take center stage are the outcomes of the Zondo Commission and the ANC's now infamous step-aside rule.
The 6th ANC National Policy Conference. This is where the ANC takes time to reflect on its achievements, struggles, and to map a way forward with regards to its policies. The conference will attempt to chart the subject matter that's going to inform government's policies for the governing party, a message that will later be sold to the electorate come the election campaign.
As you send your delegates to the policy conference, arm them with the various arguments and proposals on how we can sharpen our policies.
Sparks are expected to fly as opposing factions continue to vie for dominance in the party's ranks as the party delegates gear up to put their heads together. Ideological tensions are already rising. Amongst the issues expected to feature prominently are the recommendation of the Zondo Commission and the much talked about step-aside resolution. This as some provinces have came out calling for the resolution to be scrapped.
The step-aside resolution comes in at our National General Council as part of restoring the credibility of the African National Congress. It then gets to be taken to the 54th National Conference, regularized as a resolution of the ANC. Now, we are hearing voices coming out of our structures talking about the consistent implementation of this rule. So we are going into this policy conference. We will be able to engage. And look, out of engagement, it could be that we need to either enrich or strengthen the work that we have done to make sure that in the manner in which we implement our resolution, there is consistent application of internal processes of the African National Congress.
The ANC Policy Conference will set the tone for the party's 55th elective conference in December. This three-day conference is about politics, positioning and access to power. Amongst the discussion topics is the dire economic situation of the country, unemployment, the high cost of living, now deemed the cost of surviving. To make matters worse, the governing party has come under fire in recent months for being unable to deal with the power cuts.
All of us are hugely unhappy with the load shedding that we have all been experiencing in recent weeks. And this has demonstrated the need for the urgent reforms that we need to implement.
The status quo in the country was debated in preparation for the release of the party's discussion documents in May this year. These discussion documents include organizational renewal, progress and challenges, economic recovery, and discussions on peace and stability, just to mention a few. But the fundamental question is, to what extent do these policies change the lives of ordinary South Africans?
We had this policy conference for I don't know how many times. And fact of the matter is, South Africans is on the brink of collapse for many households that battles just to survive on a daily basis. Those people are looking forward to this weekend and to see what tangible policy recommendations, proposals will come out of this conference.
Meanwhile, the alliance partners COSATU and the SACP say all this can be achieved with the necessary political will of the governing party.
Conference must therefore also respond to this question of rebuilding the capacity of the state and tenderization of the state. If you continue the tender system as is, it ameliorates the capacity of the state to perform, because the state looks at agencies or instruments that they've created, including through the tender system, for the outcomes. And those people who have received tenders do not account to the public. It's the ANC that accounts to the public.
We have no doubt that out of the policy conference, they are going to come up with good policies, a number of them that they will come up. But it seems sometimes that what is agreed in the policy conference is not what the leadership wants.
With around 2,000 delegates from different ANC structures in the provinces expected to gather for the conference this weekend, it remains to be seen if factional battles will cause ideological tensions that might affect policy direction, or if the balance of forces will be achieved in the hope of putting South Africans first. Nedlac, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, it's either threats have worked or ANC leaders fear embarrassment, or both. In news just in, Luthuli House staff have begun receiving their June salaries. A handful of staff protested outside the gates of Nedlac in the south of Johannesburg yesterday evening as the ANC hosted a gala dinner ahead of its policy conference. The disgruntled workers alleged they had not been paid their salaries for months. Well, that's our program for this evening. Do join us again tomorrow night when we'll be coming to you live from that ANC policy conference in Nedlac. Have a good night.